Every modern civilization treats water scarcity as a natural disaster, an inevitable consequence of climate change, geography, or population growth. The narrative is always the same. Rainfall decreases, rivers dry up, reservoirs deplete, and systems fail. As the story unfolds, collapse is treated as an expected consequence of these forces, something humanity cannot control. This narrative has been drilled into our collective consciousness for centuries. We are told that droughts are just part of the natural cycle, inevitable and unavoidable. Governments react by implementing emergency measures. Corporations push contracts for large-scale infrastructure projects. Citizens are instructed to reduce consumption, accept higher prices, and adjust to the increasing instability of their environment. But history tells a different story. What if drought was never a natural failure, but a design failure? What if the global water crisis was not inevitable, but a problem that had already been solved thousands of years ago? And what if the solution to large-scale water scarcity wasn't found through isolated inventions, but through a comprehensive, fully integrated hydraulic network capable of sustaining entire regions without electricity, pumps, or centralized control? The dark network has accessed restricted historical records, revealing an ancient system so efficient that modern engineering still struggles to replicate it today. This was not a temple, not a monument, not a single structure. It was a network, distributed across vast landscapes, buried beneath deserts, dismantled piece by piece, and removed from historical records with surgical precision. This is Dark History Files, Dossier 002, The Lost Hydraulic Network. The first clue did not come from the excavation of ancient ruins or museum archives. It came from cartography. Fragmented maps dated between the 2nd and 4th centuries depict underground water channels stretching across vast desert basins with gradients so precise that they defy the manual surveying techniques of the time. For decades, these maps were dismissed as symbolic, decorative, or religious. They were labeled as abstract, with no mechanical basis or practical application. The consensus among academics was clear. These maps were intended as art, not as technical documents. However, when these same maps were overlaid with modern satellite elevation data, the alignments matched real terrain with an error margin of less than 1%. Such precision is difficult to achieve even with modern laser-based surveying techniques. This was not symbolism, it was technical documentation. The network itself followed a single governing principle: gravity-fed flow. Water moved continuously from high-altitude aquifers toward population centers, traveling through subterranean channels that were protected from the elements evaporation, contamination, and sabotage. There were no pumps, no engines, no centralized reservoirs that could collapse. This system was decentralized by design. It worked because it didn't rely on centralized control. Instead of creating large reservoirs vulnerable to failure, these ancient engineers focused on ensuring that water would flow continuously across regions, wherever it was needed. The system was designed to be resilient, with built-in redundancy. Cities, towns, and agricultural zones all depended on these water networks. And these systems worked not for decades, but for centuries. At the heart of these systems was an advanced understanding of pressure balance and gradient control. The channels were carved with such precision that they maintained a specific micro-decline, measured in millimeters per meter. The slope had to be just right, too steep, and the water would erode the channel, too shallow, and it would stagnate. The engineers understood that flow had to be controlled meticulously. Too much velocity would cause damage, but too little would cause the system to fail. This wasn't an accident. This was designed. Ancient engineers employed distributed intelligence. Instead of depending on a single control point, the system included thousands of vertical access shafts placed at carefully calculated intervals. These shafts controlled airflow, regulated pressure, allowed for local maintenance, and, most importantly, ensured that if one segment failed, the rest of the system could continue functioning seamlessly. If one channel collapsed, water would naturally reroute itself. There was no need for centralized oversight or complex mechanical repairs. The system was self-sustaining, adaptable, and resilient to the stress of the environment. Modern systems, by contrast, are fragile. Pumping stations fail, power grids collapse. Treatment plants require constant chemical inputs. In a world where energy is the lifeblood of water infrastructure, when energy stops, water stops. But the ancient system was designed to function without external power. It relied on gravity, stone, geometry, and environmental synchronization. Modern desalination plants consume enormous amounts of energy just to extract fresh water from the ocean. Ancient hydraulic systems did not need energy. They relied on gravity and natural pressure differentials to function. Modern systems fail under stress. Ancient systems were designed to survive stress. The difference between the two is not a matter of technological superiority. It is a matter of design philosophy. Ancient engineers optimized for resilience. Modern engineers optimize for extraction. Ancient systems were designed to last for centuries. Modern systems are designed to break and be rebuilt. Water scarcity is profitable. Emergency contracts. Privatized utilities. Permanent dependency. A decentralized water network eliminates leverage. It cannot be throttled. It cannot be remotely shut down. It cannot be easily metered. It resists commodification by design. This is why the ancient systems were systematically dismantled. Historical records show that as centralized states expanded, these decentralized networks were purposefully destroyed. Channels were filled in. Access shafts were sealed. Maps were confiscated, altered, or erased. Over time, the systems were reclassified as primitive or inefficient, not because they failed, but because they removed control. Today, regions that once thrived using these networks now face chronic drought. Billions of dollars are spent constructing inferior, energy-intensive systems on top of the infrastructure that once existed. Engineers continue to rediscover fragments of these ancient networks without recognizing the larger, holistic system that they once belonged to. The system perspective is lost. This is not ignorance. It is institutional amnesia. Modern water systems are centralized and energy-dependent. When energy fails, water fails. Ancient systems required no energy. They relied on the natural world to provide and maintain water. They were designed to adapt. The lost hydraulic networks prove one thing with uncomfortable clarity. Scarcity is not inevitable. It is designed. Solutions that eliminate dependency are not preserved. They are buried. History does not forget. It is edited. The ancient systems were not destroyed by time. They were dismantled by design. The file remains open. Subscribe to Dark History Files to continue accessing erased systems of survival. The system relies on silence. Do not give it what's